Day 4 of testimony in Donald Trump's hush money trial is underway. Former publisher of the National Enquirer, David Pecker, will take the witness stand again, where cross-examination will resume. As required, Trump is in attendance, and he delivered short remarks before heading into court. Let's watch.
Yesterday, I think in the Supreme Court having to do with immunity, I heard the argument. It was brilliant. I listened to it last night. I thought it was really great. I thought the judge's questions were great. And all presidents have to have immunity. It has nothing to do with me. Absolutely nothing. All presidents have to have immunity. You don't have a president. Certainly not a president that the founders wanted.
Trump referred there to the historic case before the Supreme Court Thursday, in which justices heard oral arguments on the limits of presidential immunity, which Trump has argued that he's entitled to and that it should keep him safe from prosecution in 3 other criminal cases. It appears that the justices are ready to reject the broad claims of sweeping immunity and the broad protections he has sought to shut down his federal election case. But the justices also appear reluctant to grant special counsel Jack Smith free rein to pursue those changes.
Meanwhile, today's hush money trial continues following Pecker's first round on the stand Thursday, where he revealed more on the, quote, catch and kill schemes, which involved multiple celebrities like Tiger Woods and Mark Wahlberg, not just Trump. Pecker claims killing salacious stories was par for the course. Judge Merchant, who's presiding over this case, is now considering whether to issue 4 more gag order violations against Trump, which the prosecution brought forth. That hearing is scheduled for May 2nd. Now, of course, Pecker, the former publisher for the National Enquirer, is talking about brokering this deal to suppress the Stormy Daniels stories when Trump was running back in 2016. So an interesting person to be back on the stand. And I want to point us actually to something we haven't covered yet, which is what Trump's attorney said, which was, quote, we will call him President Trump out of respect for the office that he held from 2017 to 2021. So that's what Todd Blanche said to the courtroom. As everybody knows, it's the office he's also running for right now. But I realize that the media has this tendency to intentionally have reporters and commentators say former President Trump. But I would say President Bush, and we're not going to get confused and think I'm assuming he's in office right now, or President Carter or President Lincoln. It's just what you say about someone who was president. You don't say former President Bush, former President Obama. You can, but it's a little unnecessary. We have the context. And so, I don't know, is this some kind of liberal scheme of paranoia after the 2020 election aftermath and January 6th to really intentionally be like, you guys are not successful in your coup. He is the former president, not the one right now. But it is weird and kind of unnecessary.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. We were talking about it a little bit off camera because it is something that the media is very particular about, and they don't do it with people like Obama or Bush, as you mentioned. President is an honorific, and you should still address people by it even after they leave office, similar to how if I ran into a former congressman, I would still call them congressman because that's just the polite, proper thing to do, and they earn that title, and so they get to keep it for the rest of their life. Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I'd be curious to know why they're so emphatic about that as well. One other thing I wanted to talk about, which is another thing we have not covered, I don't think, on this show yet, which is the closest comparison we have to what Trump is accused of in the hush money case, because this basically boils down to the fact that that Michael Cohen was paying Stormy Daniels to not talk about an alleged affair that she had with President Trump, and that Donald Trump reimbursed Michael Cohen for these payments and marked them as legal expenses as opposed to campaign expenses. So it's a campaign finance violation that they are quibbling over. There's the interesting parallel that in 2022, Hillary Clinton's campaign and the Democratic National Committee were accused of doing functionally the same thing with the payments that they made to Fusion GPS, who contracted with Michael Steele to put together the Steele dossier, which was opposition research against Trump. Since then, a lot of it has been determined to be Russian misinformation, but nonetheless, they paid Fusion GPS through the law firm Perkins Coie for this opposition research and did the exact same thing that Trump did. They marked this down as a legal expense because they paid it through their law firm as opposed to marking it down as a campaign expense. And notably, Hillary Clinton is not facing a criminal trial over this, and she's not facing all of these felonies. Instead, the Federal Election Commission agreed to fine her just a little over $100,000, and they basically marked it down as a mistake and said that it was unintentional. And so you see these two varying ways in which essentially the same offense has been handled. It gives further weight to the president's team's argument that this is a two-tiered system of justice.
I think it's very fascinating. When we consider Bill Clinton's misconduct, everyone thinks Monica Lewinsky, but another name comes to mind, Paula Jones. In 1994, there was this lawsuit, a civil case brought forth, alleging that Bill Clinton exposed himself in a hotel room to her. And this case resulted in a settlement in 1998 for $850,000. And now lawyers who assess the similarities and differences between this case and Donald Trump's hush money case, they say, well, it's not the same. This is settling a civil lawsuit, and Trump intentionally made it so that Stormy Daniels wouldn't ever talk to the press about it, and it's not in the press. It's just different in nature. But the law and justice are not the same, right? Does it feel the same? Because it kind of does to me. It does feel the same to have someone with the resources and maybe litigious nature, she knows someone who's a lawyer, to bring forth a civil lawsuit. That's a big decision. Maybe Stormy Daniels didn't have the resources or litigious energy to do so. But it's still, somehow he's paying off this person. Oftentimes in the settlement of civil lawsuits, there's a sum of money, but also an NDA. And so it is hush money in that sense, but it's legal hush money. And so, of course, this doesn't feel right, but it's legal. And so I think people should really think critically about how the law is applied just to people in power differently from everyone else, but how it's assessed based on what team you're on. I think we need to have some level of consistency and say both of these are really bad things to do. To have a president like Bill Clinton be accused of misconduct time and again and not receive the same criticism that people who made excuses for him are now, throwing at Donald Trump for this case. There are other cases where, it's not the same thing legally, but it feels the same morally.
Yeah, that's interesting, the delineation between whether something is illegal or just immoral. And I think you can separate out in the Trump example that cheating on your wife and allegedly having an affair with a porn star and then paying her not to talk about it is immoral. Is it illegal? I mean, then again, we go back to quibbling over whether or not it should have been marked as a legal expense or a campaign finance expense. And we have this precedent of the Hillary Clinton and DNC case. And I would even argue that the Hillary Clinton DNC case is worse because in that case, the opposition research that they paid for through the law firm ended up being used to open the Crossfire Hurricane FBI investigation into President Donald Trump. It was one of the things that they used to help justify getting FISA warrants to spy on members of his campaign like Carter Page. It was something that they used to leak to the media and then circularly use the media stories as further justification for the investigation. And that was something that dogged him for his first 3 years in office, the majority of his first term. So the fact that she walked away from this with a $100,000 fine to the DNC and $8,000 to Hillary Clinton versus Trump now facing jail time for the same offense is really incredibly hard to justify. And I'd like to know exactly how they do justify it, how Alvin Bragg justifies it. I mean, the other important part of this case, too, is that they passed a law in New York to extend the statute of limitations on these types of campaign finance violations and used a sort of suspect legal theory to upgrade them from a misdemeanor to a felony. And so, I mean, even setting aside the question of whether Trump should be in court for this at all, or if he should have just had to pay a fine like Hillary Clinton did, then there's this added element of, if he is going to court, should it really be slapping him with all of these felonies as opposed to a misdemeanor charge? Should they have extended the statute of limitations, which seemed like it was intentionally done specifically to be able to bring Trump to court? Everything about this, I think, when Trump is talking to the media as he's going in and out of the courtroom and talking about the unfairness of this trial, I think he's right.
When I consider, Donald Trump's current political position running for office and whether or not these cases are affecting his run or chances of success, I'm definitely firmly in the camp now of it's not going to change his supporters' opinions of him. And there's something that happens in politics that maybe it's happening more now. I think people have a more tribalist approach to politics more than ever. I don't know what to credit that to, whether it's, a lack of community in their own lives and wanting a sense of belonging. But there's this defense of Donald Trump by people who feel like they're in his tribe, in his camp, where they make, defenses for him that they wouldn't to someone else accused of the same thing. When we talked about Hunter Biden having dealings with prostitutes, it was, oh, what a terrible, awful guy. But when it's Donald Trump, it's, oh, well, everybody in power does that, or it's that's not what people say it was. It's this common thing of making excuses when someone's on your political side. I get comments all the time on my political skits that are like, you're an uneducated communist. And if I respond, which I really usually don't, but I used to say, like, I went to Brown University. I am educated. And then they say, oh, well, then it's indoctrination. So either you're terribly uneducated, but then if they find out you're educated, it's indoctrination. So it's the rules are always changing according to, what makes sense for their political ideology and political views. And so now that we're in this environment, they are going to make excuses for Donald Trump, but I don't think it's coming from a place, usually, of them having a double standard. I think it's coming from a place of knowing that people like Bill Clinton and other people have not been treated the same way Donald Trump's been treated for similar things. And that makes them, question the government and institutions of power in the direction of, they want Donald Trump to never be in office because they want the Democrats to always be in office. And then they say, well, the power structure just benefits Democrats. I think the reality of the situation is the power structure benefits corporations, and more people are landing on that conclusion, and they don't like really anyone who challenges the status quo. But I do think we're in a really interesting place where, this trial isn't changing people's opinions of Trump if they already like him.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point about the institutions favoring, I would describe it as the elites and the uniparty, probably more than corporations. Corporations are probably part of it, but sort of a different, I guess, separated out from the political aspect of it in a way. But you're right to say that the uniparty in general is usually doing policy that benefits corporations over the American people. And I do think that people see that, and that's part of the reason why populism has risen in both the Republican Party and on the progressive left. It's because the American people are waking up to this reality that they face a different standard of justice. And if they see that someone like Donald Trump, who has all of these resources, who used to be considered, a part of the elite establishment, was someone who was really revered by these people and viewed as a celebrity, for him to be on the receiving end of so much political and legal pressure, they think, oh my gosh, if they came after me, like, I wouldn't have the resources that Trump has to defend himself. I would be totally screwed. And so they kind of view him as their champion, of someone who's taking the arrows on their behalf, trying to, I guess, in a way, protect them or expose what is happening on the highest levels in the justice system in terms of the politicization of it. And I think the other aspect of this, and why people do often reflexively defend Trump, is that they don't think that he's like a great guy or the moral standard for someone who is running for office. But what they do see is they see the Democrats and the left who are trying to keep him out of office of continuously taking things too far. And instead of just criticizing him for the Stormy Daniels affair, for example, they've decided to create this legal scheme to basically put him in prison for a bookkeeping error. And so they feel like they have to defend him from the whole sum of the circumstances because of how radical the response to it is. It was the same issue with Crossfire Hurricane, where instead of just pointing out that Russians were buying Facebook ads to attempt to upend the American political process, there was this dastardly scheme that Trump was being blackmailed from a random video in Moscow that was taken with prostitutes, and therefore Putin was using him as a puppet. And so every time these schemes to keep Trump out of office go way too far, even trying to take him off the ballot in places like Colorado and Maine, that's how you end up with a loyal group of people in politics who want to defend him from all of these attempts because they view them naturally and properly, I would say, as an example of the establishment using its power in ways that is unethical, immoral, and is a double standard. So it creates this setup where they do end up sometimes defending him for behavior that they might not have if there weren't this overblown response from their political opponents to it.
Absolutely. I think you're right in saying it's the uniparty, it's the elites that want to maintain the status quo and sort of quash anyone who speaks out against it or tries to change, what the dominant political narrative is in the country. And corporations are just the vehicle for capital accumulation right now that the elites have. But there's a revolving door there, but behind America's biggest private companies and government and financial institutions, quite frankly. And so it's almost like we're reaching a point where it's pretty clear that the uniparty exists, especially, we're going to talk about this in a minute, but when we look at the consolidation around Mike Johnson by some Democrats, that if you're willing to vote for the thing that benefits the military industrial complex and, people who have investments in Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, that if their pockets are getting lined, they're happy with voting for the legislation, sending billions of dollars to Israel, which is an unpopular policy among the American people. And so the populist movement, while divided, while I'm not someone who likes Donald Trump as a person, because I'm on the populist left, I do think that I have more in common today politically with people who cast ballots for Donald Trump than with Nancy Pelosi, for example. And that's a really interesting political environment to be in. And quite frankly, I think neither candidate, Joe Biden or Donald Trump, should be president. I don't think Bill Clinton should have been president. I think we've had a lot of people with very questionable behavior get to the highest office. And whether that's a product of good people never wanting to serve as the commander-in-chief of the U.S. military and hold the office of presidency, or if it's just the product of America's political industrial complex, whatever it is, I think most people are very unhappy with the type of people who seek leadership in the United States and quite frankly want them to look more like us and less like, DC lobbyists.
We're going to take a break. We'll be back with more Rising after this.